Welcome back. In this video, we are going to implement the functionality so that we can actually change the text that is displayed here. So it doesn't say new text, but it's actually going to display the text that we want to display. Not before we run the game in Unity, but actually while running the game. And that is something that we will do in a similar fashion as we did this user input. So we need to define a new variable inside of Unity that will then allow us to use this text. How can we do that? Well, let's go over to our code and do the same thing as we did with our input field. So let's go ahead and create a public. And now a public what? Is it an integer? Is it a string? Is it an input field? Well, it's none of those. Let's actually check it here. So let's right click and see where it is. It's UI and then it's called text, right? So let's try that in code. Let's try text like so. And you will see that it says class unityengine.ui.text. So it's inside of the same namespace as our input field. It's inside of this unityengine.ui. So seems like it's legit. It's exactly what we wanted. So let's call this one game label, or you could call it game text or something like that. Okay, now let's actually save the script and go back to Unity once it's loaded, and we will see in our game logic, game object, that our script now has this new field called game label. Now we can actually change the game label either by clicking on this button here and then select the text, but which text is it? Well, that's a little confusing because we have three texts in our scene. So you see here in the scene. So where do we have those three texts? Well, they're hidden inside of our button and input field. So here you have the text as well as this text. So we never defined a proper text name for our text item here. So let's change this UI element text here to, for example, game text. Okay, now go back to our game logic and now select the game text from here. Now, of course, you could have also just dragged it all the way down here like so. That would work as well and does basically the same thing. But dragging can be tricky because, well, if you click on it and then suddenly you can't drag it anymore. So you have to click on game logic and now you have to drag it correctly. This works well, but sometimes it's just better to search for the item. Okay, now we have assigned our Unity game object into our code. So we dragged it into here, which means that now we can actually use it in our code. So let's go back to our code and use the game label now, which is our text. So we can go ahead and, for example, in the start method, define that the game label will display a different text. So let's do that by changing the text property. So you might recall that the user input had this text property, but the game label also has this text property. Because even though it's a text, doesn't mean that we can just get its text straight away. We need to get the text using the text property. But we don't want to get the text this time. We actually want to set the text. So in order to set the text, we can just use an equal sign to assign a new value to the text property of our game label. So let's change it to something like hello world, like so. And this will be executed. So this line, basically setting the text of our game label, will be run in our start method. So basically once our game logic script is loaded. So let's save our script. Let's go back to Unity. And once it's loaded, let's run our game. And we will see that once the game is loaded, you can see it says hello world here. So now we know how we can change the text. Now let's actually adjust the text so that it displays whatever we currently have inside of the debug log. So here let me enter 25 and it says try lower. So now please go ahead and change the code. So by that I mean the code inside of our game logic here in those if statements and else if and else blocks, so that it will actually change the entry of my game label to display whatever we had inside of those debug log statements. So basically I want to display onto the screen, so in my game label, correct in the case that we were correct, try lower in the case that the number was higher than the random number, and so forth. So please go ahead and try that. Okay, I hope you tried it. So I'm just going to get this game label. I'm going to set it to be correct, like I have it from here, like so. And then I'm going to do the same thing in here and in here. So here I'm going to use try higher with a semicolon at the end. And here I'm going to use try lower. So you can see we can just assign a string to our text property. Well, because here you see it says string. So this text property is expecting a value of this type string. And this is the, well, type string basically. So now let's get rid of this hello world thingy here. And let's save our game. And let's run it once it's loaded. So here, let me enter 5 and you see it says try higher. Now let me enter 10 and you see it says correct. And let me actually enter 15 and it says try lower. So now we know how we can manipulate our UI elements using code. That's a very powerful tool. You can not only manipulate your UI elements this way, but also other components of your game objects. So you could, for example, change the position of a player doing this and so forth. Okay, so now let's actually add another change because new text is not very appealing. So if we run the game, it just says new text. So instead, I would like this to be deactivated. So how can I deactivate this text? Well, there are two ways. Either I just make it an empty text. That would be one option. And the other option would be to actually disable it or make it invisible. Let's for now just use the simple approach, and we're going to do that using our code here. And actually, let me stop running the game. And then in here, I'm just going to set the game label .text to be an empty string. So an empty string are just two quotation marks because there's no empty space, no nothing in there. It's just an empty string. Okay, that doesn't mean that the object itself is empty, but it contains a string. Okay, so let's save this and let's go back to our game. Let's run it. And you can see the text doesn't appear or isn't visible. Okay, and now once we enter a number and we click something, you can see it says try higher. All right, that's it for this video. See you in the next one.